charge goes down the muzzle or the opening here. It's like a cannon. It's also called a flintlock because what creates the spark that burns the gunpowder to cause the explosion or the firing of the shot comes from this piece of flint here.
Oh.
This little rock, and that's a piece of flint, really hard, sharp stone. When it strikes against this metal here called the frison, this hard piece of metal, it produces a spark. So you'll see that the hammer hits the frison, causes the spark, and lights gunpowder that we put in this little area here called the pan. If you look closely, if you could see closely, there's a little hole that goes from the pan into the base of the barrel. So what we do, and we'll just do a demonstration loading for you so you get an idea of what happens. The first thing we do, we do a safety check, is we go into a half cock position. Now the half cock is a way of making sure that we can load safely, okay? Because I can pull the trigger and it's not going to accidentally go off. If it goes off whilst I'm loading, I've got trouble, I'll lose my hand, all right? Because it is genuine gunpowder, the only thing that's missing is actual charge. Now I have a packet of gunpowder here. This is enough gunpowder to blow my right buttock off.
Oh.
And that is a bad plan. So normally when we have powder, we have a case which has got two covers to prevent sparks jumping in there. Have you got a charge there, Jared? Yep. Okay, so I'm just going to... Now in the actual days of musketry, the charge was put in a paper thing called a cartridge. This is where we get the word cartridge paper. It comes from here. The French thought that that looked very much like the cartouches that were used in the hieroglyphics when they went and visited Egypt in 1798. In here you would have the powder and at the bottom a ball, a musket ball. I've only got powder here. So the first step is, having gone to the half cock position, I've opened the pan and I get the top of the cartridge off. Well, the rules for getting in the British Army is you had to have front teeth, opposable teeth, at least one, so that you could bite the top of the paper off. You would then, I would then enter a small amount of powder into this area called the pan. I now close the pan. The reason it's in a pan is so that when I turn it around like this to put the rest of the charge and the bullet in, the powder doesn't fall out of the bottom. So the rest of the charge goes in, and normally at this point the bullet would come in as well, a little musket round, a lead bullet, and then the paper would be your wadding, which would help hold all of that down the barrel, and you'd ram it home and you return your rammer, and so now you are loaded and ready to fire. Okay, and we're going to go over there and fire so we don't make too much noise. We would then come to the shoulder arms. That has powder. It now has powder inside the barrel. When the hammer with the flint hits the metal frison, spark is created, burns through the hole at the base of the barrel, ignites the charge, and kaboom. Are we ready for a kaboom? Yes. Very good. So I'm going to join my private over there. His last name is Private Parts, but on just a few occasions that Private Parts comes out in public. So let's go over and join Private Parts and we'll see what we can do for you. About face. There we go. Private Parts. First we say make ready. Now in the make ready order, we pull the hammer back one further step. You hear the click, listen carefully. Okay. It is now ready to go, and now we're going to present arms, fire! Now, of course, what you're probably smelling there, accompanying you halt, is you're smelling the burnt gunpowder. It's got a lot of sulphur in it, so it smells like rotten eggs. Okay? So, the really important in this period to be ready for battle. One of the big things that the First Fleet made a mistake about was they forgot to give the Marines who came out of the First Fleet enough ammunition. And so for the first year, one of the big secrets in the colony is that there was very limited ammunition for the Marines. They only had a few charges, and when they changed sentry duty, if they had a charge down their barrel, they would pull the charge out into the other sentry's hands and pass it on so it could go down the next barrel. There was such a shortage of powder, and if the convicts had known, they could have easily have overpowered the guards and taken control and escaped. But fortunately that did not happen. As you can see, it's got a lot of burn and it generates quite a lot of heat, and normally this will foul up. So every time you discharge, the burnt powder builds up. It leaves a kind of residuey, tarry kind of thing. One of the problems with that is it causes misfires. So that tiny little hole starts getting clogged up with the burnt gunk of the burnt gunpowder, and this meant that misfires were a very common thing, particularly as you shot the weapon over and over again. So it needed constant attention to be able to clean the hole, wipe out the residue, so you didn't get a misfire. Now, misfires were so common, and probably the most common one was called a flash in the pan. Now, you may have heard in Australian language there is somebody being called he's a bit of a flash in the pan. In other words, he's all show, no product, okay? And what that comes from is the fact that it should be empty. Now, I'll just do a safety check. Could you just listen for my ping there, sir? And make sure I don't have anything left down there. Yeah, yep. Clear? Right. That means we can play with the weapon because it's empty, okay? If the hole becomes clogged up or the powder becomes wet and it doesn't go off, sometimes what will happen is when you go to full cock and you get the spark, it ignites the powder in the pan, but it doesn't burn through to the powder at the bottom of the barrel, and that's called a flash in the pan. And was one of the most common kinds of misfires. Another one is because this is Stone Age technology, the flint is a really important part of it. The flint had to be really hard to keep its edge to create the spark. In those days, often it was the colonel of the regiment who would supply the equipment to his soldiers, and sometimes the quality of the flint wasn't good. The outside of the flint, as a stone, is really soft, it's white, it's flaky, doesn't hold its edge particularly well. So to be a skinflint, if you called your commanding officer a skinflint, you've heard the term, you're cheap, that's because that was the cheapest part of the flint, and if that was supplied to you, you knew that was poor form. In order to keep the flint sharp, you had to pay attention to it by a process called knapping. Now, knapping was a process where you took a little hammer and you just kept that sharp so that it would continue to create the spark of the plate. If you were in the army and you were caught napping, it was a chargeable offence. Essentially, that didn't mean that you had fallen asleep, it simply meant that your flint was not sharp enough